Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
So you can go down the line, find everybody has their own particular types of stress, but so students are not special in that regard, but perhaps they have sort of unique types of stress, or at least we ought to be aware of how that works.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is Brad Rieger, who is a graduate student in special education at the University of Toledo. Today, Father Bacik and Mr. Rieger will be discussing how collegians deal with stress. Now, here's Father Bacik.
Brad, I'm glad that you have been willing to come on this program. I think some people recognize your name from having played basketball at the University of Toledo, and probably have read about you in the sports pages of our Toledo Blade, where they have written some marvelous articles about you. So people may well recognize that name. Really, I mention that to establish one fact, and that is that you indeed did play basketball at the University of Toledo. And what I want you to do now is to publicly comment on the time that you and I went one-on-one in Centennial Hall. That's the real reason I brought you on this program.
That was the hidden agenda, huh? Well, you did. You had that pump fake move, and you burned me badly. But the rematch will be soon, so.
You swore me to secrecy. I could never say how that match turned out.
Okay. But now the media has brought it to the attention of everyone.
Yes, right.
So I was trounced, but the rematch will be soon.
We'll go ahead again.
That's right. The rematch will be soon, and tickets will be sold as a fundraiser for the parish.
Okay, we have to get serious, Brad, on this. I really didn't bring you on this program to talk about basketball.
I'll be leaving right now.
Yeah, right. But to talk about student life on campus, and perhaps especially about some of the stresses that are involved in student life, and also perhaps some of the ways that one can deal with that, especially through retreat experiences. So you are really still a student, aren't you? You just had an exam yesterday.
Yes. I'm in my graduate program, my master's in special education, and it feels good. I had my last exam yesterday, so some of my stress is alleviated.
Yeah, you've reduced the stress. Good. Well, the fact of the matter is that everyone in our culture lives under a lot of stress these days. I mean, everyone you meet thinks that they're busy and they have pressures and so on. We have a lot of self-help books out these days on the question of stress. You have mothers of children who are saying they're driving them crazy already. A woman was telling me that summer has just begun. The kids have been home only a couple weeks, and here she is off the wall already because these kids are giving her such a bad time. She wants to send them back to school. So they have their kinds of stress. We talk to business people who feel great pressure with decisions to be made, large bucks on the line, and so on. So you can go down the line, find everybody has their own particular types of stress. But so students are not special in that regard, but perhaps they have sort of unique types of stress, or at least we ought to be aware of how that works. Let's talk a little bit about that. And I happen to have read a very fine paper that you wrote on this topic, and I'd like to explore that with you.
Okay, that sounds good. The paper was broken up down into a couple categories, but if we're just talking about stress right now, the first area that I kind of got into was just the stress of the pure academic demands that are on a student, dealing with coursework, reading material, tests, pressures for tests, exams, term papers, just that aspect of college life breeds a lot of stress.
Right. So the academics itself, the pressures to make grades in connection with that, and the hard work involved. I suppose that, well, you get sort of mixed signals. I think that some people who have never been to college and don't know that world, I think sometimes they have sort of an overblown idea of what college life is all about. Perhaps they see it as more academically oriented than it sometimes is. I mean, let's face it, a lot of students at the university are finding their time for recreation and not everyone is taking it with total seriousness or working hard all the time.
I've had my days like that.
Yes, right. I suppose all of us who have studied know the times when we have goofed off a bit and not gotten around to the books. But on the other hand, there are genuine pressures for anyone who takes it with seriousness. I suppose a lot of that comes to do with time, doesn't it? The fact that very often one feels pressure. I don't have enough time to prepare adequately for this exam, or my paper's due in 1 week and I haven't done the research yet, and so on. I think that comes into it.
One of the big things is you take 4 classes, and it seems like the professors only think that you're taking their class. And so there is not any, the students sometimes feel, I'm speaking from my own experiences, that you don't feel that the professors have a very much empathy towards the other aspects of your life, and that you're getting dumped on, but without any feeling from the academic faculty or whatever that, hey, I have other things to do also, let alone I have 3 other coursework.
Yeah. I think that my students this quarter seem to think that I fell right into that category.
So we're talking about you today.
Yes, that's right. That I put this enormous amount of work on them, and reading and a paper every week and all of that. And I think that that's probably true. The professors do think about their course. I guess certain standards get set up as you go along, where you sort of figure, well, there's about this much reading that students can handle in a quarter in 1 5-hour course, for example. Mm-hmm. I believe that's generally how it works. So at the University of Toledo, we're on the quarter system, and many professors began their teaching career in the semester system, and you end up compressing perhaps the material you used to teach in a semester into 1 quarter, and perhaps that gives the feeling of busyness again. When you're figuring a quarter lasts really 11 weeks, and one of those weeks is exams, you've got 10 weeks, and you got a midterm after 5 weeks. Seems like students are just constantly under pressure in that system.
Yes. Also the factor of just procrastination, just the reality of no matter how how dedicated you are as a student, there's always a tendency to let things go to the end. So a lot of times the stress is brought on by my own or other students' own mismanagement of time or irresponsibility. But there's still that balance between your own responsibility for the predicament you're in, and also the structure of the college system.
Right. Oh, that's a good distinction, and I think that that procrastination, we all know that in our lives. I wonder if sometimes we don't put pressure on ourselves on purpose that way, almost.
I mean, better under pressure.
Yeah, that's what many people say. I generally have felt that my students do not work better under pressure, or the pressure of time deadlines. That's been my... Usually when someone dashes in and says that and turns in their paper at the last minute and have been working on it, you will find more than the average number of mistakes in the paper. And I always have the feeling that if they had read it over just one more time and done the corrections, they would do better. But I think we do put pressure on ourselves like that. Sometimes it's very mysterious. I think when I do that in my own life sometimes, I don't really understand why I do it. Mm-hmm. Because, to put something off, a heavy task, I've got one right now that I feel that way about, a writing task that I have, and I have not gotten to it the way I should. And I sort of ask myself periodically, why haven't I done that? Because it does create sort of undue pressures in that way. You create an anxiety that you just wouldn't have to have if you would get started on it.
I can relate to that too. This paper,
that I was referring to before?
Right. No. That was for a curriculum development class, and that was, I enjoy talking about retreats, and I really put a lot of time into it, a lot of effort. But as I was doing that, everything else was sliding by the wayside. So after I got done with that and was feeling real happy with it, I looked around me and found 3 other projects that were due in a matter of 3 weeks. And
because you had put everything into this.
Yes.
Well, one of the theories, I think, of dealing with procrastination, however, is to get the major, most significant task done first. Mm-hmm. And maybe perhaps especially the task that seems most foreboding or that is heaviest to you or most anxiety-producing, to get on that one early. So maybe students would be well advised to to look at their coursework as they begin a quarter and say, which is going to be my hardest class, I'll get on that first, or what looks to be the most burdensome paper, maybe I'll get that started. That'd be one way perhaps of dealing with that kind of stress. So we've got academics as one thing that causes stress, and the time element involved and so on, and just the fact that professors are demanding in this way. Anything else we should say about that, or shall we move on?
I think we covered it there.
Okay, all right. Let's tell me the second thing that you found to be stressful for students.
I think one thing we'll just touch on briefly,
Okay.
and maybe cover at a later time more, is just the stress of deciding a career. It's hard enough to know what you want to do with your life, and then these 4 years of college for me have been a very stressful time. I was in business for a year and a half and decided that was not me, and I switched into special education. But that change was a very, very stressful time, and all through my college days, I've still been wondering if it was the right move. Taking in all factors, the economy, job possibilities, money, everything, and I think it's been very stressful for me. And there's an akinness to everyone else on the campus to that.
It's a major kind of thing. In fact, it's probably such a big issue, Brad. Maybe we ought to bracket that for a while, and almost too large to tackle in a way. And maybe we just note it as surely one of the great causes of stress among students, young people generally these days, and other people as well. I mean, the people who are facing unemployment and so on. So, as a major cause of stress. Let's go on to another one. I think that you had developed another one, just as sort of the general milieu of the university life, being away from home, new surroundings, new people, and so on. Let's talk about that one for a while.
Okay. I guess in my research, I found that it's been documented that even though it seems more upfront that the pressures come from the academics and also the career, realistically though, and speaking from my point of view, the most important thing to me is developing relationships and establishing who I am as a person. And no matter how much the stress was on the other aspects of my life, that was the most important thing to me as I'm going through my college years. And so just the idea of the social aspects of campus life is really the most important thing that has been on my mind as I've gone through college, and it seems to be the same type of feeling among other students.
And this causes stress in certain ways. Well, I'm thinking about the whole social environment when people leave home, I think, and begin life at a university, often leaving a very settled situation, a high school where they knew everyone, perhaps had all their relationships intact and so on, where they lived at home and where their world was neat and orderly in many ways. And then here they are thrown into this large environment with thousands of students where they know very few people, don't have close relationships with the professors, and so on. And of course, perhaps exceptions to that to our smaller liberal arts schools as an example, but when we're thinking of the large state universities, certainly numbers and unfamiliarity has to breed a certain amount of stress. I know I've often talked to freshmen who come in who are just totally bewildered, upset, mostly, I suppose, wondering, can they make it in this new environment? Are they capable of coping with this strange situation?
Back when I was a freshman, I just had this overwhelmed feeling. And I had, like you said, I had left a good network of friends and close family ties. And I remember my parents dropped me off at the dorm room, and they left with my mom crying and everything. I sat at my bed, and I didn't know what I was doing.
Yes.
But just that overwhelmed and also very lonely and isolated feeling. And I knew that's the first thing I had to take care of. I wanted friends. I needed to meet people. But just finding people like myself that I can develop friendships with is difficult. Because like, if you're in a group, we have so many different standards. People come from diverse backgrounds, and it was stressful for me.
And you were highlighting sort of the aloneness part of that, of feeling that when you come into the university setting.
Right. And I guess I just perceived how people dealt with that in various ways. A lot of it is dealt with in heavy partying, a lot of drinking, a lot of loudness, obnoxiousness, where you give a sense you see people on campus, it looks like a lot of good times. A lot of it is a result of just a loneliness and a searching for something to fill the void. And I think it takes many people 2 years to figure out where the void, how it can be.
I notice that people seem to cope with that in varying ways. You'll get people who hit the party scene early on in sort of a wild, frantic search for friendship and relationships. I find other people who seem to withdraw and just can't cope in that way, so they become loners and so on. I suppose that one of the things that happens is that people form small networks eventually, don't they? They come to know a certain circle of friends and have the people that they can rely on one way or another.
And that was very important for me to get. I was lucky because I did play on a team, so there was a structure there for me to get to know people, and offshoots of that, door openers as far as to meeting people. So I was fairly lucky, but still it was difficult because of my upbringing and just finding people that I can relate to, and oftentimes very alone, laying in bed at night just going, man, I feel very lonely.
Yeah, and where do I fit in here?
Right, and just that sense of and by myself. I realize now my parents aren't, I don't have their protection. I don't have the protection of just, I feel the sense of responsibility for who I am as a person and my actions. I think that was also, the responsibility started to come in.
Yes, that's an important part of this stress, I think, that many people feel, not just in the university setting, but in the growing up years and in the culture as a whole. That is that feeling that now it's on my shoulders, that no one else can take it over for me. I must fend for myself, and the responsibility for shaping my life, becoming what I want to be, rests right here. The great philosopher John Paul Sartre existentialist used to say that we are condemned to freedom. Can't get away from it. It's almost like a death sentence. You can't get away from this personal responsibility. And I think maybe students very often feel that very strongly.
One of the areas, this might be just throwing it out, I don't know, it might not be as appropriate if we have enough time, but just one of the big things is the area of sexuality. It's a very difficult time, just dealing with that. It's a very awakening time, very uneasy time, trying to figure out where you are, trying to not only find yourself, your identity as a person, but a big part of that is just your sexual person and how that integrates.
Right, and how to form the kind of relationships you're looking for.
And then again, the responsibility comes in.
Right, yeah, that is a extremely large area, but certainly part of what feeds into this problem of stress. One of the things that's coming out of this, Brad, is this whole need to form some sort of smaller groupings. I wrote an article recently where I was talking about the fact that many people will describe their most important religious experiences in terms of small groups. So people will be in the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, and say, boy, they found out more about God there in that intimate sharing than any other place. Or people will make a marriage encounter, and they'll say, boy, that was one of the best times I ever had in my life. I came to know my spouse better than I ever have before. And so the small groups seem to be a big part of what is needed here when you feel lost and alone and in unfamiliar territory. I suppose that's one of the reasons that we have the Greek system on campus, the sororities and fraternities that allow people to bond together with others who share some of their interest and perhaps to live together in some situations and to have common activities, to have the party structure already set up for one so you don't have to look for that and so on. And I think the Greek system perhaps performs an essential function that way for many students. I think they find themselves in that setting.
Like I said earlier, for myself, the athletics served a big,
right.
That was my vehicle as far as relating to a group. Or else maybe I would have joined a fraternity.
Right.
The team, the basketball team is my fraternity.
Yeah, all of the people who are in athletics usually find some bonding with the people they play with, and that small group forms that way. One of the things that you wrote about in your paper, Brad, that I thought was really good was the whole retreat experience. You tried to analyze from many angles what retreats can do for students and how you have to plan them and the kind of things you can do in them and so on. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that as retreats as sort of an antidote to stress, or a way of trying to handle the stress. And I suppose one way it works is by the very fact that on retreats, and you have in mind the collegians going away to another spot and interacting perhaps over a weekend, just to give a model or example of that, and where there's talks and a chance to share and so on. And that part of the good thing that happens in the collegiate retreats is that a sense of community is often created. And maybe that helps to deal with the stress then.
Just the isolation, the aloneness that I was talking about, how I felt, throughout my career. The retreats, the reason why I really got into this paper was because that aloneness left when I went on the retreats. And it wasn't just something that happened for the weekend, and then when we came back on campus that we were back to the grind and feeling alone. And but now the retreats were such a big impact on my life that it somehow put things in perspective, a broader perspective, and helped me see some of the demands in a different light, in a broader picture, and not be so tunnel vision oriented as far as I got to get this done. This is expected of me. This is what I need to do as a collegian, and it just gave me a better sense. And the community's key too, because when I see the people on campus that I was on various retreats with, that instant feeling comes back of, hey, this is what's really important, what we established.
And we shared something.
Right.
Tell me some of the experiences on the retreat that would help create that sense of community. Maybe, I know that you've both been on the retreats and also run them. And so, drawing on both experiences, why don't you say a little bit about what happens there that helps create this sense of community?
At first, it starts out real slow. The first that we get there Friday night, and it goes on. People are still kind of caught in their social roles and haven't quite dropped their guards yet. But as the weekend goes on, it's amazing how you see people drop their guards when one or two people take the initiative to let down and say, hey, this is who I am, these are the struggles I'm going through, and this is what it means to be a human being to me. And as other people hear that, then they say, hey, they're just like me. But no, we never talk about those things. We never talk about the human condition, or just what it means to be a human being. And on a retreat, that's dealt with. The struggles.
So that the students who are on the retreat would talk rather freely about their own struggles, their crosses in life, their weaknesses, limitations, that would come out in the general conversation. And your point is that when that happens, then you don't feel so isolated in your own struggle. You then feel part of this group. You know that you have joined the human race, so to speak.
Right.
That you're not an oddball or weird because you're dealing with problems of sexuality, or you're trying to handle the masturbation problem, or trying to figure out how to relate to the academic pressures and so on.
And I think the biggest thing for me is just the sense of hope that comes out of it. And I talked about in the paper that the retreat is not a problem-solving session. It's a sharing and hopefully generate hope in people. That's what it did for me. And my life, I still deal with a lot of things, and a lot of times very disappointed, disillusioned, but there's still that hope. And I think a lot of it has to do with just what I've experienced with other people, other collegians on these retreats, because I can draw on that experience and say, hey, I got a glimpse of maybe how God meant it to be. Or
So I am interested in your one phrase that it's not to be a problem-solving experience precisely, but I would, in my words, I guess, more one that would give you perspective and offer hope to you. And that happens again just through the informal sharing, you think? One of the things that happens in the retreats is that certain students are given the task of giving talks, right?
Right.
Witness kind of talks.
Right.
Give me an example of one of those. Or I know you gave one.
I gave the last retreat. I just went as a participant and just sat back and viewed and was a part of it, and that was a different perspective, and I really enjoyed that. The time before that, I gave a talk on unconditional love as being a goal that we can strive for as God being the model of unconditional love, and something we can try to emulate, something we can never really fully attain maybe, but something we can strive for.
And try to do that in our own lives, to be an unconditional lover.
Right. And I think that the team that runs the retreat are all collegians, and those people are willing to share on a deep level. And a lot of the atmosphere of the retreat or the sharing that goes on is a result of those people really taking the risk and bearing their souls, so to speak. And the significant input by the team members are probably the guts of the retreat.
Mm-hmm.
And then that helps small group discussions and prayer services. It creates the sense of transparency, of risk, of trust. So it starts really with the team and their willingness to share on more than a superficial.
Your own experience has been that there's been a carryover on this, right?
Right.
I think that some of the data that I have read suggests that for some people that doesn't seem to happen, that you can't count on the carryover into the rest of one's life. And I suppose that's with any kind of learning experience. But I know that some sort of the retreat movements try to build in a follow-up, therefore. We think of the Cursillo and marriage encounter and the exercise retreats that we have for collegians and so on. There's always this sense of follow-up where people have the opportunity to get together again, to relive the experience, to build on it, to mine the riches of it, to figure out what it meant for them exactly, and so on. So I think that it probably is, perhaps one can do that personally or in some smaller one-to-one situations, but it does seem vital to find a way to keep that alive, to keep that going in one's life, so that that function of being a hope-giving device can be fulfilled.
One of the things that when myself and this other college student, we ran this, we were in charge of the retreat, we were in charge of the team and the topics and all that. One of the things we tried to do at the end of the retreat was say that there's a feeling a lot of times that you don't want to go back to the real world, so to speak, and you want to stay in this little utopian type situation. And what we tried to say is that, hey, you're going to go back out into the cold world, so to speak, but what we shade here might be, this the start of the hope, and when we see each other, that's where it will continue. And we encourage people to try to continue what we experience, and not when we see each other just a casual hello, make something special.
Oh, that's really a good idea. All that stuff you were saying about, sharing at a deeper level and so on is something that the culture as a whole needs so much. So many people are starved for that. I'll bet there's many people who would just be amazed to be present to hear the collegians talk like that. Some people have this idea of all the collegians running around drinking beer all the time and partying and not caring about religion or anything. To me, it's always so inspiring to hear that. And I believe that many people really would be surprised to hear the level of the conversation, especially the depth of sharing of weaknesses and limitations.
It is. That's like I said, I've been on campus for 5 years, and I think the things, as I look back on 30, 35, I'll remember those retreat experiences. Those will stick out. They do now, but I'm just saying, even down the line, I imagine there will be probably the most important times of my life, the 4 retreats that I've been on.
And I think that one of the reasons for that is that it almost gives you like a methodology or a way of trying to live life generally. It reminds you that deeper sharing is exciting and helpful, that hope comes out of interacting with other people. In other words, I think it tells you that, in dealing with other people, that you could have a degree of intimacy at times. I think that's part of what you carry with you.
Right. And you also gain a sense of maybe some of that we spend, at least I did, I spent so much time in trivial things. When you experience a retreat experience, you really sense that we spend a lot of time doing things that aren't that important.
Right.
And I think that's been a very important insight for me.
That's a perspective point, and probably one that helps you to give you some hope. Well, Brad, we've been talking here about this whole idea of stress on campus, and there are indeed particular stresses that students have as they deal with the pressures of the academic world and the deadlines of papers and tests and so on. There's stresses that come from the fact that people are in an unfamiliar environment, have to create a new kind of network. And I suppose for many people that creates the need for smaller groups, for intimate sharing, for being close to another human being. And certainly the retreat experience is a marvelous opportunity for this. It's a chance to get together, pray together, and know the presence of the Lord in a special way.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer